Suzanne Cleveland, welcome back to Boston Confidential. We're going to have to start calling this the Suzanne Cleveland Show. This is the third time you've appeared on Boston Confidential. So we did have some developments in this case today, Suzanne. What's going on?
The news just drops that the Post Commission has finalized an agreement with William Farwell for his voluntary decertification. The document yet, it seems like we might have seen this coming, the mountain the shoes to drop, or so it seemed, but it sure got quiet in the meantime.
It got abruptly quiet. I
I'll
think
be uh, I'll
we
be
had both
reading that
said off
after the
camera we
certification.
hadn't read the decision yet, but I think they're all about the same. And he would have had to agree to it, or he could have appealed the decision. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding. You know what, Barry, this harkens back to interview either one or two when I was mentioning that among the issues they had with William Farwell was that he did those searches. One of the things I scanned the document real quick, and it did say that he has agreed to put himself in the NDI, which is the National Database Index for that. I remember I affectionately referred to it as the biggest scumbag index
Yes, the
because
Giants, yes.
I couldn't remember the acronym, but that was among the aspects of the agreement is that he would nationally decertify.
Both him and his brother have been decertified at this point, right? That's a step forward, and the brother is still in custody, right? He's still being held without bail?
Oh, he's not going anywhere, Barry. The FBI made sure of that.
Yeah, thank God. It was about time. I just can't believe this case. Actually, I can believe it. The local law enforcement community, Massachusetts wide, has just had some really black eyes lately, and it seems to be systemic. This seems to be the Canton police, the Stoughton police, the state police.
It's not looking good, is it? This situation dragged out. It still continues to drag out for 3.5 years, meaning from the point of the murder of Sandra Birchmore, those involved with her abuse and ultimately her death had 3.5 years. I don't think it's going out on a limb to be horrified, disgusted, and disappointed with the Massachusetts State Police in regards to that investigation and
Uh,
the lack of safety towards the community and anybody who could have been affected by the actions of those involved with Birchmore.
Up and down the chain, this guy, Trooper Garino, who fancies himself some type of cell phone forensic expert, missed 40,000 messages in this case. That's a rounding of his errors. Is that right? 40,000 text messages?
Hopefully, we're going to find out in due course of the real investigation whether or not this was an actual miss or whether or not it was an order. Because
Right,
it seems to defy logic that somebody who is a so-called expert in extracting data is
right.
unable to extract this voluminous level of data.
This Trooper Garino missed 40,000 text messages in the Sandra Birchmore case. He also missed in the Karen Reed case, the infamous "How Long to Die in the Cold" Google search. What do you have to do to lose your job in this state?
A lot, evidently. Jen McCabe is a civilian. The rules involved with investigating a law enforcement officer, there's a lot more involved with that. I'm not letting Trooper Garino off the hook on that. They definitely had a heads up that there was a great deal of incriminating data and nightmares were appearing before their eyes. Instead of pursuing that further or up leveling the degree of interest towards the officers involved, what do? Put it aside, quiet conversation, and say, you know what? She just died by suicide. Let's just move on.
Right,
It's uncomfortable. It
right.
doesn't look good, but
Both
we're
of
just going to
these
go ahead and
cases
leave it there.
involved the police, and they knew right away. And I think we've went over this before. This is where the fix could be in, is data. If the data is not discovered, I hate to see cover up in every incompetency, but these two cases overlap in terms of the police being suspects or should be suspects
Mhm.
almost right away in this case. And all the evidence that Garino finds or doesn't find seems to point away from those law enforcement subjects. Uh, I'm baffled by it. And I saw some documentation come back in the Karen Reed case. These guys got some suspension time, some laughable amount, and they describe these text messages as inefficiencies. Can you imagine that, Suzanne? They
I
called the
mean,
text messages from Michael Proctor to Yuri Buchanan, his supervisor, inefficiencies. If that's how they're looking at this, nothing will ever get fixed. They're just not looking to do it.
we can't say nothing, Barry, because August was a big month. Watched in glorious splendor the apprehension of Matthew Farwell.
That's true.
And we watched the hammer drop. I know you have a troubled relationship with the FBI, but they are
I
doing
do.
their diligence. The affidavits continue to be the most harrowing and straightforward documents that I've seen in my stint in the world of true crime. They're very
All right.
detailed.
So, Suzanne, both Matthew and William Farwell are now discertified as police officers in Massachusetts. That leaves former Deputy Chief Devine. Can you give us some insight on how we got where we are with Devine today and his role in this Sandra Birchmore mess?
That aspect of the case, it's gotten really quiet on the home front in terms of Divine's role. In fact, up to the last post commission hearing, which was another hearing to discuss the adjudication, I replayed all three because I've got that kind of time, evidently. These hearings are all several months apart. I think it started in March, a first hearing to go over what are we looking at in terms of this data. And Robert Stowe, attorney for Robert Devine, much to his dismay, is struggling with unfurling this data and continues to ask for more time. Each time we've had these hearings, he has said, Your Honor, I think if I've got another 2 months, I could be ready for this adjudication hearing. March, June, what was it? September? Yeah, it was September. So that's three. In each one of those, Robert Stowe says he needs 2 months to get through this data. I want to point out, and there's nothing legal about this at all. When I hear this guy protesting, this is a lot to to go over, Your Honor. We don't know what it is. We know that it's something along the lines of 250 times 2 hour movies or 170,000 pages. They're trying to describe it in terms of media, and both Roberts are overwhelmed, understandably. But when I hear this 2 months, I need another 2 months. Here we are at 7 months. And it reminds me of a movie with Better Off Dead when the kid is coming to get his $2.
I want my
Um,
$2.
I want my $2. I need my 2 months, Your Honor. And the way they're talking about it is as casual as that side by side car conversation with both Farwell brothers saying, Oh, I know it's a lot, isn't it? Sure, we can give you some more time. We don't
Right.
need to really take it that seriously. And amongst the rest of the objection to this thing is, Your Honor, we don't even know if that's really him in the video. And we certainly don't know if Robert Devine is Martin Riggs. Amongst
Um,
the objections is we don't understand what this data is. Martin Riggs isn't really the shadow account for my client. That's preposterous. And what makes you think you're going to be able to identify him in those videos anyway? You
uh,
won't see his name or his face in any of these items.
Suzanne, what was Deputy Chief Devine's career like coming up at the Stoughton PD? Bumpy from what I've learned.
It wasn't always bumpy. He did a lot of great things in his career. He's been on the Stoughton force since 1999. I know that he was a school resource officer in the early 2000s. One of the debatable issues is his onset into the Explorer program. During his internal investigation with Ryan Holmes, in his first cooperative interview, the one before he lawyers up and says, I don't have anything more to say. He says, I was told to take on the Explorers program in 2003. And that's not true. It started in 2002. There is gray area in terms of how one takes on the Explorer program. Is it something that you can sign up for to boost your resume? We're not really going to
Right.
know the answer to that, but it does matter. The difference between saying I took it on in 2003 versus 2002, all of those things matter. And they
Right.
matter to Holmes because he said, I do not find his answer credible. So, in taking on the Explorer program, which continued but didn't always thrive, it was just there in the background,
Right.
continued to push forward. Devine had other things to do and moved up the ranks. His former chief described it as a slow and steady rise. I would call it more meteoric because he went from being a patrolman to SRO and I think lieutenant and sergeant and then became XO.
At
At
that
one-
point, he was deputy chief, right?
No, XO was
Commanding
before
officer.
becoming
Yeah.
the executive officer, which actually I'd like to learn more about. It's a designer role for Devine. It gave him a lot more responsibilities and oversight and a lot more control over the interoffice technology. And that is important because among the many things that are being debated in terms of his background is whether or not these accounts that he used to communicate with Sandra Birchmore and with other youths originated during the course of his work as
Right.
an executive officer.
Right.
That was one of his career escalative moves was to take on the role of implementing social media initiatives within the Stoughton Police to build up community interaction.
Right.
He was successful at it, and it's also the origin story for Sandra Birch being in contact with the officers via becoming friends on Facebook and being able
Right.
to share interest in the Explorers program. And it was like a chat with the
Right.
community. It looked community friendly, didn't it? And it was also used, there was some, I don't know all the tech terms, but mapping being done. They brought in, I want to go back to this and reflect on it again, but brought in a young woman who is an intern from Bridgewater State to help with internet mapping eh, to find the hot spots where the activity was going on and enhance their office communication and things like that. Um,
Right.
so there were a lot of bells and whistles from a technology standpoint. It's interesting, this argument of we don't know what all that data is and what's a terabyte. You created a lot of these initiatives. You actually,
So let me just say, I should have done this at the outset, and I'll do it in the pod recording as well. Nobody besides Mr. Farwell has been arrested or charged in this case. Devine hasn't been, and the twin brother has not been charged. No convictions. Everybody is assumed innocent that we're talking about in
there's some stuff going on from a civil standpoint, from a decertification standpoint, but they don't seem to move quickly enough. Again, we go back to that 3.5 years. And my interest in talking a little bit more about Robert is that it seems that there could have been some indicators along the way that things were not perfect. While he was at the helm of all of these initiatives and in charge of all of these kids, were there any signs that there was trouble?
and there was.
Um,
What were they?
I just heard this story the other day and I don't know what to do with it. It was a combination of things. We've got this whole denial of who knows each other and this denial of whether or not there was any prior knowledge of the Farwell's behavior. That's where the 2002, 2003 debate comes in important because it, Devine himself talks about bringing on Matt and Billy and their countless hours with the Stoughton Police Explorer program where they grew up. To his own words, he said they were in his very first Explorers class 11 years ago. The date of that particular article, but it predates the
Right.
situation we're talking about now. And he
Sure.
says that they grew up right before my eyes. If we played an even small part in their success, I'm very proud of it. So the same person who is basically saying that guys that I worked with, I brought them in, I gave them a chance. I don't have anything to do with their behavior. He's basically In the previous articles, I think that one was back
Right.
in 2010 or 2011.
He's a genius for hiring them, but when they went bad, he barely knows them.
There was a lot of patting on each other's backs about the brilliance of, for example, May 2013, Shastani talking about Devine being his right-hand man and working with the state legislature to create the position of deputy chief around him. So he's already executive officer and beefing up this Explorer program. Then they built a position around him to put him into an even greater degree of being in charge of everything.
Right. His rise was somewhat meteoric, like you said, but what about
The fall, the fall wasn't really a fall. If you're talking about the scandal of 2014 involves, we're gonna leave this poor woman out of it because she's already been through enough. There was an extramarital situation that went bad, and in the thrust of the fallout, Divine concocted a plan to not only bring this woman down for having the audacity to disagree with him about the terms of their breakup, but also to make a victim out of himself. As the ugly details of the relationship broke, and there was some messaging coming to light, I can't speak to how this man's mind works, but there was a harassment prevention order put into place against the ex mistress. Divine's wife doubled down and took one out on her behalf too. So they have this double harassment prevention order in place. So this is going through 2014 and into 2015. While that harassment prevention order was in place, he continued to contact her and call her and say, you know what, I'm sorry that all happened. I'm going to court and I'm going to drop that thing and we're fine. I still love you. Let's get together. This is all in the internal report. At the thrust of it was that there was this ongoing electronic harassment. The ex girlfriend was reacting poorly to the breakup. Now,
right?
during the
And let me
course of this,
just the department knew about this. The other woman had contacted the Stoughton Police Department administration, correct?
no, it's not exactly how that went. She didn't contact them when the harassment prevention order went into effect. They went about investigating a criminal complaint about her harassing behavior. They went to investigate her, and there was an incident where a floral delivery went to Mrs. Devine, Officer Devine. I don't know her title now. That basically was a rude, threatening message. The content of
Right.
the message doesn't matter, but it would have been upsetting to any wife who was finding out the hard way about the
Right.
fallout of the relationship. Problem is that this floral delivery and harassing message didn't originate from the mistress. It was actually done by somebody relative to the person who put in the complaint himself. I will never quite fully understand that, but the messages that were exchanged that were being complained about by Divine, there was this litany of repeated communications and this use of, I don't know if you're
Right.
familiar with spoof accounts where you can mimic calls. Somebody that I'm close to said, yeah, I used this fake phone number thing to trick my ex into thinking that I was really calling from work. And I was like, you know what? Don't tell me anymore. I'd like plausible deniability. There, one is called bandwidth, one called pinger, where you can basically
Right.
mimic calls and text messages. As this investigation is ensuing, the Stoughton officer subpoenaed the floral delivery. They found out that was coming from inside the house. That was a rotten cream. And then they move on to subpoena spoof account records, had to do all kinds of third party requests. By the end of it, they realized that at least some of the activity was coming from Devine himself. So he was mimicking this ongoing harassment campaign.
What do you think the motivation for that was? Why would he want that? Attention? Yeah.
Intention to be able to
Because
perpetuate
that's
victimization.
psychotic.
And there's that too, being not right in the head. I think we could throw out the argument that it was to make good with his wife because she participated in the campaign. She actually caught some heat from her place of employment for misuse of police resources. Uh,
This was a brutal affair, and the repercussions were equally as brutal.
this woman's life. Toward the
Right,
end
and
of
then
this,
his career.
he doubled down each time. They said, "The stuff that you're sending us, the copies of these messages look fishy. We've got a subpoena for this spook that place. Oh, you won't find anything there." And just was thrusting it back in their faces that there's nothing to see here. Um, but they pressed on, and as they continued, they discovered that a lot of the transactions originated from him. So he did end up facing repercussions. She was apprehended by Massachusetts State Police and Easton Police. Towards the end of this, he gave her a call one night and said, "Let's get together in a restaurant and talk this over. It doesn't need to be this ugly. I want to see you." She took the
Right,
bait and ended up going to jail for it. While she was in jail, her place was investigated. Her apartment got tossed. Her tech was detained, and it
wow.
was all put in the hands of Mass State Police to continue investigating. And what they turned up at the end of it was that she didn't do most of what she was accused of doing. In spectacular Devine fashion, they didn't just let the investigation play out. He and his wife said, "You know what? We'd really like to just go back to normal. We're going to let this go, and we want to drop the harassment protection order and let everybody get away from this ugly business and go back to our lives." Um, so they dropped the pending court case at the point where this poor woman was coming in to face the fire and was going to go to jail. She'd already been arraigned. There's that infamous booking photo that
Right,
Morrissey's office said they don't have access to, but then promptly stuck it on the front page of the newspaper next to Devine looking heroic. That's a power move that the Norfolk County DA likes to do, to show a woman in her worst state of distress so that the world can see how crazy this blank looked at their
right.
booking. Not the
Yeah,
fact that
absolutely.
they're under a complete highest amount of stress about, why am I here? What am I going to jail for? What in the hell is going on? That's
So, before the Birchmore murder, I had read about this, I think, a little bit in the newspaper, and that's why I remember it being so ugly. Was he demoted from was he deputy chief at the time, and he goes back down to patrolman? Because that's rare.
He was deputy chief at the time, ended up being suspended on leave with pay for a while
Some
they
people at the
figured it out.
department wanted him fired, correct?
Yeah, some people, I think a lot of people wanted him to be fired. So they had this extended leave, and I don't quite know why. This could be a whole other episode, Barry. There was one Stoughton town official, Hartman, for when they had a meeting to discuss Devine's fate, whether or not he was going to be let go or return to duty. They had a closed
Right,
door meeting that lasted 15 minutes. A couple people stormed out and were not happy with the outcome. Hartman said, "This is my decision and my decision alone," and he stayed. And everybody said, "Well, at the very least, you got to bring him down to patrolman." He's fine, done. Brought him back, and he said, "By the way, he's going to have a lengthy penalty before he comes back at patrol." That lengthy penalty was 60 days unpaid, which, in the grand scheme of things, ruining a
right.
person's life, changing her name, losing a job, having to start over in absolute disarray. 2 months doesn't seem like much to me.
No, especially for a deputy chief, that's some crazy conduct, and I know everybody's human, but this is so beyond the pale for the second in command for the Stoughton Police, and
It's not a good
just
look. It wasn't an everybody's human kind of thing, because his own chief, Chief Shastani, ended up leaving the department because he was outraged by the decision to keep Devine on.
I think he resigned shortly thereafter, that chief, right?
E- So you're talking about Shastani after the decision was made to keep Devine on and demote him to patrolman. Chief Shastani retired from his role as chief, and he left in pretty spectacular fashion. He had, there's no legal term for this, had a colossal fit. When he was supposed to go into a town meeting to do like the formal goodbyes, "I've really enjoyed my time here and my tenure. We've done a lot of good things." Instead, he gave a letter to the janitor and said, "Here, hand this to them," and walked away. In his letter, he said that he is disappointed in the town and that he feels absolutely betrayed by Robert Devine.
Wow. His character really shows up there and it rings true now, doesn't it?
I would say so. There was some writing on the wall there, not only from the internal investigation standpoint, because they didn't come out favorably. He was found to have engaged in conduct unbecoming and engaging in untruthfulness. And that was the outcome of the internal investigation. So that is documented. They flew in the face of it and said, we're just going to keep him on as patrol and he can redeem himself. There are a whole bunch of articles with scholarly experts in the world of law enforcement that said, "Eh, I'm not sure if that's the right move. He could excel at it or could crash and burn." Now we know the outcome,
Right.
allegedly.
It's a good way to go out, retire, and hand the letter to the janitor. Besides what happened to Sandra, you were dead right. You were absolutely dead. Nice mug, by the way.
Oh, but cheers. Thank you. It doesn't seem like there was a lot of love after
Right.
that, but everybody moved on from it and went back to doing their day to day policing. It just seems that it was very different for Divine, for
Vine
everybody.
went on to law school, correct? And I know he's an attorney now, but I think this was around the same time, wasn't he? Either about to attend law school or in law school?
I don't know exactly when he started law school. That would be a separate project because there's a lot of his history that is tough to find. If you're ever interested, Barry, he's got a couple of scholarly articles in the Stabery Tort. One of them is about how to prevent unstable people from owning guns. He's a published expert. He's also a big proponent of tasers and employing more tasers in the department. In fact, not to jump around in terms of a time frame, there's one published article where he is touting the access to tasers being very helpful to law enforcement. I don't recall the year. I want to say maybe 2011 or 2012, that he cites an incident where all of his officers have to react to an incident at a baby shower and ended up having to employ their tasers inside this recreational hall during this baby
Wow.
shower. He's quoted in this scholarly article by saying that my officers showed a lot of restraint by using their tasers instead of their guns at the baby shower. It was an actual melee. We're talking baby shower. We're talking balloons and
No, I know.
women with toddlers and baby, and
It's hard to
they
picture
showed a
even
lot of
needing a
restraint.
taser in such an environment, right?
This story makes a little bit more sense, but it's an interesting quotable that he says they showed a lot of restraint using their tasers instead of their guns. They do love their tasers in Stoughton Police because it increases funding. If you get the grant for the tasers and you get more funding. If you use them and you don't shoot everybody at the baby shower, you get more funding.
He's a local attorney now. Does he have a big practice? What's he practicing for law? Because it's hard to believe somebody with such an attached history can be an attorney in
he,
the state.
he has clients. He is practicing in keeping with confidential communications with their attorney. He probably
Right.
spends more time on his own case than on anyone else's. I wonder why somebody would want to hire somebody who is deemed untruthful by law enforcement agencies.
How long did he serve as a patrolman? I know he was demoted from deputy to patrolman, and
That would have been
how
2016 to 2022.
that's when
He retired. Well, so in between the first conversation when he was brought in to discuss Sandra Birchmore's death, in between the
right,
first conversation and there was a scheduled second, let's get real and actually answer some questions. The day before
right.
that was to happen, he filed for retirement and said, you can speak to my attorney moving forward.
Wow.
Said that
What a
all of
bunch
that
America's finest here in Norfolk County.
before he had his own bit and said, you can speak to my attorney. I don't want to answer any more questions. He leaned into the tech information shown to him about his interactions with Sandra Birchmore. He leaned into that as the product of him being hacked, which, by the way, was the same strategies employed with his former love interest. He uses the word bamboozled. I trusted this person. I don't know how this happened. I was
Yeah.
bamboozled. I've been hacked. And the person who was conducting I think his name is PI L'Italian, basically said, "We've found no evidence whatsoever that he was hacked. We have found no evidence whatsoever that Marty Riggs' account is not really him. If anything, we find a lot that supports the argument that everything is done by him."
Suzanne, you're the first third time guest on the show. What's the next shoe to drop in this case? What happens next?
Yeah. See, I don't like to make predictions. We've got to see how things go with William Farwell now that he's decertified. Today's a big day.
It is.
That, of course, you and I both foresaw. We knew that it was going to end in a decertification, but the terms of the voluntary part do make a difference because he is going into a national index. And it does make you wonder, did he choose that?
Maybe
Maybe
somebody
somebody,
voluntold him to do that.
or maybe he was able to use that strategy in order to keep somewhat of an existence and continue working for the army in
Well,
Arizona, for example, or maybe providing helpful information to take
I
somebody
think
else down.
somebody is chirping. I
But
don't
I
know
wouldn't
who it
want to
is.
roll the dice on this one. Divine is the character, and he's going to continue. I think he needs another 2 months to look at that data. Another 2 months,
Just
60 more days. We got to watch all these movies. They're not good ones. But my advice would be don't participate in that data, and then you won't have 2 months to cull through it. But
what a
I don't want to make
bunch.
a prediction. I definitely think there's going to be more happening from the civil standpoint and from I don't know what the post commission does next, except for their next discovery hearing. Divine. There is no date for his adjudication at this point. It's just another sit down to go over this terabyte.
All right, Suzanne, thanks for joining us today. When the next shoe does drop, and I think it will in the next couple of weeks, we'll get back with you if that's all right.
I'll be on the edge of my seat as usual.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you, Suzanne.
Bye.